Most people assume Darth Vader left Mustafar because he had healed enough to move on. The brooding was done. The fortress had served its purpose. The Empire needed its enforcer back, and he went. That explanation is simple, and it is wrong. The move from Mustafar to the Executor was not a recovery, it was a declaration, and the reason behind it runs deeper than most accounts of Vader's life ever go. The fortress and the flagship are not just two different addresses, they represent two fundamentally different answers to the same question, and the choice between them cost Vader more than anyone around him understood at the time. This is the real reason Darth Vader left Mustafar for the Executor. This draws on both canon and Legends material. Where both sources agree, the details are treated as confirmed. Where they diverge, the distinction is noted. Mustafar was not a retreat, it was a construction site, and what Vader built there had nothing to do with the Empire, and everything to do with what he had lost on that planet the day he became Darth Vader. Chapter 1. What Mustafar actually was. According to the Canon comic series, written by Charles Soule, Mustafar is a dark side nexus, a location where the dark side of the Force runs deep in the volcanic rock, embedded in the landscape over millions of years of destruction. The planet consumes, it destroys. For someone attempting to rebuild himself out of destruction, that made it appealing. When Palpatine sent Vader there after his surgery, the Emperor framed it as a temporary assignment. Mustafar was where Vader would rise from the wreckage of his defeat, not where he would remain. The ritual was designed as a launching point. Vader would draw on the pain of what had happened there and convert it into dark side power and leave. The Emperor intended him to move on. Vader stayed, and the decision to stay, stretched across years rather than weeks, tells the full story of what Mustafar actually was to him. Not a transitional space, but a terminal one. A place where the cycle of grief and dark side energy and failed ambition ran on a continuous loop, feeding itself on the same material without producing anything new. He did not simply occupy a pre-existing structure, he built one. In the Fortress Vader story arc from the Darth Vader comic series, Vader commissions the construction of an enormous fortress on Mustafar, working alongside a Sith architect named Momin, whose consciousness had been preserved inside a mask after his physical death. Momin's design was not decorative, it was functional in the most Sith sense possible. The fortress was engineered to amplify the dark side energy flowing through the planet and use it as a conduit for something far more ambitious, to open a door into the world between worlds, the mystical dimension where time, memory, and the Force itself intersect at their deepest level. Vader's actual goal was to reach Padmé. He wanted to pull her back from wherever she had gone. That ambition was the reason behind years of construction, the engagement with Momin's dangerous intelligence, and the enormous expenditure of resources on a remote volcanic planet that served no Imperial military function. The attempt failed. The door opened, but Padmé was not there. What came through instead was darkness in a form that even Vader could not use. The failure was total. This is the detail that most accounts miss when they discuss Vader's time on Mustafar. The fortress was never a military installation, was never built to project Imperial authority or serve any function in the Emperor's war machine. It was a monument to grief, constructed by one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy with the sole intended purpose of undoing the one event that defined everything he had become. When that purpose failed, the fortress became something else entirely. It became a permanent record of everything Vader could not change. That failure had consequences that went beyond loss. It put Vader in direct conflict with the doctrine he lived under, a doctrine that had very specific things to say about grief, about stillness, and about what the dark side actually demands from those who claim to wield it. Chapter 2. The Sith Doctrine Problem. Mustafar was not just a poor strategic choice, it was a philosophical violation, and the Sith philosophy Vader operated under does not tolerate violations quietly. The dark side, as Palpatine understood and taught it, does not reward inward focus. This is not a philosophical position, it is a doctrine with specific and measurable consequences for how power is generated and maintained. In issue 1 of the Darth Vader comic series, the Kyber Crystal bleeding ritual illustrates this precisely. Vader does not corrupt the crystal through passive willpower. He pours his pain into it, actively, externally, through sustained force imposition directed outward. The Sith method of empowerment requires that suffering be directed at something outside the self. Pain that stays internal is weakness. Pain that is imposed on another object or another person becomes a source of dark side power. Palpatine reinforces this principle directly in Issue 6, when he tells Vader, "You of all people know better than to dwell on what could have been." The Emperor is not offering comfort, he is identifying a tactical failure. Dwelling on the past produces nothing the dark side can use. The Sith philosophy is fed by action, by domination, and by will applied to the present moment rather than memory. Mustafar violated this doctrine at the structural level. A fortress sits still. It absorbs. It holds. Everything about its design, the enclosed chambers, the isolation from Imperial operations, the deep attunement to a single planet's concentrated dark side energy, invited exactly the kind of inward focus the Sith considered counterproductive. Vader had turned Palpatine's intended launching point into a contemplation loop. Every day spent inside the fortress was a day spent looking backward, towards Padmé, towards Anakin, towards the architecture of decisions that could not be reversed. The comparison to the Barash Vow clarifies how serious this deviation was. The Barash Vow was a Jedi practice, a complete withdrawal from action undertaken as penance, in which a Jedi removed themselves from engagement with the world and meditated inside the Force. Jedi Master Karak Infilla had taken the Barash Vow and was in the middle of it when Vader tracked him down in Issue 3 of the same comic series. Infilla was strong. His Force connection was sharp from years of dedicated practice. He was prepared for the confrontation in every physical and spiritual sense. Vader killed him. The narrative makes no argument about this. It presents the outcome as the logical result of what each man represented. The figure who chose contemplation over continuous engagement died at the hands of the figure who chose engagement over contemplation. The Sith canon does not consider the outcome ambiguous. Yet on Mustafar, Vader was living the Sith equivalent of the Barash Vow. He had constructed a fortress around his own grief and spent years inside it trying to reverse what could not be reversed. By the standard of everything the Sith taught, this was not devotion. It was deviation, a prolonged detour away from what the dark side actually required of him. The rule of two, as Darth Bane established it, was never designed for stillness. It was designed to concentrate power through constant pressure. A master who pushed, and an apprentice who strained against that pressure until strong enough to overthrow the master entirely. The entire system ran on imposition and resistance. Two Sith, in perpetual tension, each making the other sharper through conflict. Mustafar offered Vader no tension. The planet did not resist him. The fortress did not challenge him. The isolation protected him from nothing, because the only things capable of threatening him at that point were already inside the suit. Staying on Mustafar was not Sith discipline, it was Sith stagnation dressed in the architecture of power. That doctrinal failure inside the fortress had a real-world counterpart, and the event that made it impossible to ignore happened not on Mustafar, but above a small moon called Yavin, when a single torpedo did what the entire Rebel Alliance had failed to do for years. Chapter 3: The Death Star Lesson. The Executor did not exist because Vader wanted a bigger ship. It existed because the Empire had just learned the most expensive lesson in its history, that concentrating all of your power in one fixed location is not strength, it is a target. For nearly 2 decades before the Battle of Yavin, the Empire's ultimate deterrent was the Death Star. The battle station embodied one specific theory of authority, that absolute firepower concentrated in a single massive structure capable of destroying a planet was the highest expression of Imperial power. The logic was clean. One planet destroyed, every other planet warned. The galaxy's compliance was maintained not through universal occupation, but through the credible, demonstrated threat of total annihilation from a single source. Vader had already been living that lesson on Mustafar for years before the torpedo was fired. The Death Star and the Fortress shared the same philosophy: absolute power concentrated in a single fixed location. One was a planet killer anchored in space. The other was a dark side nexus anchored to volcanic rock. Both were built on the theory that enough concentrated force, held in one place, was the highest expression of power. The Battle of Yavin destroyed the Death Star. The attempt to open the door to the world between worlds destroyed the fortress as a viable purpose. The torpedo that ended the station made explicit what Mustafar had already demonstrated privately, that fixed positions, no matter how formidable, are vulnerable in ways that mobile authority is not. A single torpedo destroyed that theory, along with the station. The Death Star's loss at Yavin did not only cost the Empire a weapon, it invalidated the entire philosophy behind it. The argument for concentrating all deterrent power in one, slow-moving, fixed-trajectory object collapsed in real time. A fixed target can be found, it can be studied, but it cannot adapt when a pilot abandons his targeting computer and acts on something the Empire had spent 2 decades trying to destroy. The Executor was the answer to that failure. According to the Essential Guide to Warfare, Vader did not simply receive a command ship through the normal Imperial allocation process. He dismantled his existing command structure and built Death Squadron from scratch, a personal military task force that operated with open-ended authority to incorporate warships from regional governors as operational conditions required. The Executor served as Death Squadron's flagship, but its significance went well beyond serving as a bigger command ship. It was mobile, it was adaptive, it cannot be pre-planned against in the way that a planet or a fixed installation could. And according to the Essential Guide to Warfare, the Executor-class Star Dreadnought's true purpose was not to win individual engagements through superior firepower. Its purpose was to make resistance feel impossible. The scale alone, 19 kilometers of weapons, shields, and crew, communicated a message that no fortress on any planet could communicate. That the Empire's capacity for violence was not anchored to any fixed location, and that it could appear anywhere in the galaxy at any time. Mustafar communicates nothing to anyone beyond its own atmosphere. It does not warn neighboring systems. It does not relocate when strategic conditions change. It does not appear at the edge of a sector and force every commander in the region to recalculate their options. The Executor communicated its message across entire sectors, simply by existing and moving. But the shift from Mustafar to the Executor was not only about strategy or deterrence, it was about something the Sith place above almost everything else: genuine ownership. And what Vader owned on the Executor was something Mustafar could never give him. Chapter 4. The first space Vader owned. Mustafar was given to Vader. The Executor was built by him. In Sith doctrine, that distinction is not a small one. It is the difference between occupying your master's space and claiming your own. Mustafar was assigned to Vader. The planet was not his in any meaningful sense. It was a location Palpatine directed him to during a period of physical recovery and psychological reconstruction. The fortress Vader built there was his creation, but it stood on ground that belonged to the Emperor's galaxy, built at a time when Vader was operating under Palpatine's direct guidance. Even the dark side energy flowing through Mustafar predated Vader by millions of years. He accessed it, he did not own it. The Executor was different in a way that went to the core of Sith philosophy. Vader built Death Squadron himself, outside the normal Imperial chain of command, and without working through the existing military hierarchy. He assembled the task force by drawing warships from regional governors and consolidating direct command authority over them in a way that no other Imperial officer held at the time. According to the Essential Guide to Warfare, regional governors contributed warships to Vader's campaign, and Death Squadron's operational reach extended across the Outer Rim in ways that conventional Imperial task forces could not match. No Grand Admiral, no Moff, no figure in the Imperial hierarchy below the Emperor himself commanded a personal military apparatus built on those terms. The Sith doctrine Vader operated under was explicit. Power was not given. It is taken, constructed, and maintained through continuous acts of will. A home assigned to you by your master is, functionally, still your master's home. A fleet you built through your own authority, answerable to no chain of command below the Emperor himself, is something fundamentally different. The Executor was also the first environment Vader had constructed that reflected him completely. On Mustafar, The planet's dark side character predated him and would exist long after he left. The Nexus energy was a resource he drew on, not a culture he created. Aboard the Executor, everything was shaped by his direct presence. Officers who fail were killed publicly as a lesson to the rest. Operational schedules were built around his priorities. The ship's internal atmosphere, the fear that permeated every deck, the standards of performance that defined acceptable conduct, all of it emerged from Vader's daily presence and from the example he set through consistent and ruthless enforcement. Nothing on Mustafar had to answer to Vader. Everyone on the Executor did. And Vader was not the only dark-side figure who reached this conclusion. The pattern he established on the Executor repeated itself across decades, confirmed by every major dark-side ruler who came after him, in both canon and legends. Chapter 5. Mobility as a dark-side principle. Every dark-side ruler who came after Vader made the same choice, not because they followed his blueprint directly, but because the dark side, followed long enough and honestly enough, leaves only one answer when the question of where to plant your throne actually gets asked. Palpatine himself governed from Coruscant, but his actual power was never anchored there. His identity as a Sith Master was defined by mobility, by the ability to appear, impose, and move. He held the highest office in the Republic while simultaneously operating as a covert Sith Lord who traveled, recruited, and manipulated across decades and across star systems. The Senate chamber was a stage. His real power had no fixed address and no single point of vulnerability. In Legends continuity, the same doctrine took hold immediately. Grand Admiral Thrawn commanded from the Chimera rather than any fixed planetary headquarters, treating static positions as tactical liabilities rather than sources of strength. And every major Imperial strategist who followed Vader's example confirmed the same instinct. In canon continuity, every dark-side ruler who came after Vader confirmed the same logic. Snoke refused a planetary capital and commanded the First Order from the Supremacy, a ship nearly twice the size of the Executor. Kylo Ren inherited that command platform rather than building a new Starkiller base to replace what had been destroyed. Even Palpatine's final incarnation, coordinating from the Sith Eternal Fleet assembled in the unknown regions, chose a mobile force of planet killers rather than a single fixed installation. No figure in the post-Vader dark-side transition invested serious resources in building a better Mustafar or improving on the static fortress model. Every significant decision moved in the same direction, towards mobility, towards autonomous command platforms, towards personal flagships that travel with their masters. This is not a coincidence. The Executor demonstrated something that changed the strategic DNA of every dark-side operation that followed. A Sith Lord, or a dark-side sovereign of any kind, exercising power from a mobile platform retains all the advantages of authority while eliminating the central weakness of fixed locations. The platform cannot be surrounded. It cannot be besieged. It cannot be cut off from supply. Rather, it moves on its own terms and appears where it chooses to appear. Mustafar held still while the galaxy moved around it. The Executor moved through the galaxy and compelled the galaxy to respond. That difference is precisely what Sith doctrine demands. It is also worth noting what Vader was doing operationally during the years he still used Mustafar as a base. He was not idle, he was hunting Jedi survivors, conducting operations across the galaxy in his capacity as the Emperor's personal enforcer, and managing Imperial political affairs through a combination of direct violence and calculated intimidation. Every mission required him to leave Mustafar, carry out the operation, and return. The fortress was where he went between actions, not where action happened. The Executor collapsed that distinction entirely. Action came to Vader, or Vader brought the action to wherever it needed to be, without a fixed point of return defining the rhythm of his operations. But none of this truly explains the timing. To understand when Vader actually left, and what finally made the fortress dispensable, we need to look at what Mustafar had given him over the years, and the specific moment when it stopped having anything left to give. Chapter 6. What Mustafar had left to offer. Mustafar was not useless. During the years Vader spent there, the planet gave him real things that the broader galaxy could not. The question is not whether it served a purpose, the question is when that purpose ran out. and what happened on the night it finally did. During the early Imperial period, Mustafar served a genuine purpose. Vader was physically compromised in ways that limited his operational capacity. The life support suit he wore after his injuries on Mustafar kept him alive, but it also constrained his movement in the Force and reduced his overall power level compared to what Anakin Skywalker had been. The dark side energy concentrated in Mustafar's volcanic ground was a resource he needed during that period. It supplemented what the suit took from him. The isolation also served a function. It kept him from operating in the broader galaxy before he had stabilized enough to do so effectively. The fortress also provided something more difficult to name: finality. Some portion of Vader's consciousness had continued to function on the belief that the outcome might be reversible. The years of construction, the engagement with Momin, the extraordinary investment of resources and dark side power, all of it was built on the premise that what had happened to Padmé might not be permanent. When the door opened and she was absent, that premise was eliminated. The fortress, in a specific and painful way, gave Vader the only thing it was capable of giving him: a definitive answer. After that answer arrived, Mustafar had nothing left to offer. The dark side nexus was still there. The planet's connection to the Force remained as deep as it had ever been. But Vader had already extracted from Mustafar everything it could give him. The pain had been focused and redirected. The loss had been confronted and confirmed as permanent. The attempt had been made, and the conclusion had been reached. Continuing to occupy the fortress after that point was not strategic, it was inertia. The Executor offered something Mustafar was structurally incapable of providing. It offered forward motion against a target that had not already yielded. Every engagement with a rebel fleet, every system brought under Imperial authority, every officer executed for failing to meet Vader's standards, all of it was action directed outward at a galaxy that continued to push back. The dark side philosophy, at its core, is sustained by friction. It responds to the continuous application of will against resistance. Mustafar had already surrendered to Vader's presence. It offered no resistance. It had nothing left to push against. The Executor resisted him constantly, in the forms of officers who made mistakes, rebel cells that refused to collapse, and a galaxy that had not yet submitted to the Empire's full authority. That resistance, by the doctrine Vader lived under, was exactly what a Sith Lord needed to remain sharp. All of this brings the question to its final point. Not just why Vader left Mustafar, but what the move itself reveals about the dark side, and the kind of power Vader was always building towards from the moment he put on the suit. Chapter 7: The Verdict. Vader did not abandon Mustafar, he outgrew it. The story of how that transition happened is also a story about what the dark side actually is. Not grief dressed in black armor, not suffering preserved in a volcanic fortress at the edge of an empire. The dark side, in the tradition Vader inherited and Palpatine constructed over decades, is a philosophy of perpetual forward motion, of will applied outward at a galaxy that must be made to submit. Vader's years on Mustafar were a deviation from that philosophy, sustained by something the dark side does not accommodate for long: hope. The hope that a loss could be undone. The fortress served its purpose during the years immediately following his physical transformation. It was where he survived the earliest period of his existence in the life support suit. It was where he processed a loss that had no resolution. It was where he invested enormous resources in building something massive out of grief, and where he watched that investment fail to do what it was built for. When Mustafar had given him everything it had, the pain, the dark side energy, the final answer about Padmé, there was nothing remaining there to serve the Sith Lord he was continuing to become. The Executor was not a new home, it was a declaration of what came next. It declared that Vader's identity was no longer organized around endurance and grief. The next phase was authority, built on his own terms, exercised through a military apparatus that answered directly to him, operating across a theater too large for any fortress to contain. Death Squadron did not patrol a single volcanic planet. It moved through the Outer Rim and reshaped the strategic balance of the entire region. The Essential Guide to Warfare records that regional governors contributed warships to Vader's campaign, and that Rebel command leadership was forced to continuously relocate because of the pressure Death Squadron exerted. A man sitting inside a fortress on Mustafar does not force Mon Mothma to move her headquarters. A man commanding 19 kilometers of warship from open space does. The Executor proves something that no fortress ever had, that a single individual could project darkside authority across an entire theater of war without anchoring that authority to a fixed location. Every darkside commander who came after Vader, every mobile command platform, every personal flagship, every strategic refusal to concentrate power in a static installation built on the model Vader established. The Executor was not the end of anything, it was the beginning of a doctrine that outlasted the Empire itself. What followed, Death Squadron, the Executor, the campaigns that made the Outer Rim ungovernable for anyone else, was Vader's answer to that moment. Palpatine had told Vader to rise from the site of his greatest defeat. He did. It took years longer than the Emperor intended, and when Vader finally rose, he rose into something Palpatine had not fully designed and could not entirely control. The Emperor wanted an enforcer who would depart Mustafar restored and obedient. What he got was a Dark Lord who left the fortress on his own terms, built his own military apparatus answerable to no one below him, and projected authority across the Outer Rim in ways no single location had ever made possible. A fortress is where you endure what you cannot change. A flagship is where you become something the galaxy is forced to answer to. What Palpatine built as a leash became the model that outlasted the Empire itself. Two threads run underneath the story, and neither of them ends here. The first is Palpatine's role in all of it, not just as the man who sent Vader to Mustafar, but as the architect who made sure Vader never grew powerful enough to turn the Executor against him. That story goes further than most people expect. The second is the question of what Vader actually was across each stage of his life, how his power changed, what it cost him, and where every version of him truly stood in the Force. That picture is more complete than the armor suggests.